On the afternoon of August 8th, 2021, police in Minneapolis, Minnesota, were on edge. Tensions had reached a boiling point, and it appeared that the city was on the brink of yet another gang war. Just hours earlier, a 31-year-old man named Prince Martin, aka Prince Hinton, had been gunned down outside a gas station that was known as a popular hangout for gangsters. Prince himself was not just a local father of four, but also a charismatic, high-ranking member of a gang called Taliban, or YNT, that was well known to police. No one had been arrested for killing him, but everyone knew who YNT's crosstown rivals were. Minneapolis gang detectives, like Sergeant Andrew Schroeder, had plenty of reason to be scared. For the past 15 years, a bloody, seemingly endless rivalry had taken the lives of many around the Twin Cities, from gang members who were deeply involved in the conflict to innocent children who were simply in the way of a stray bullet. While some of the rival gang violence could be chalked up to disputes over control of money blocks and drug turf, much more of it was simple vengeance. Just murder begetting murder, as people who had recently lost loved ones decided to lash out. In this part of town, an absurdly high percentage of deadly violence could be attributed to groupings of allied gangs that were respectively known as the Highs and Lows. These collectives claimed turf on opposite sides of the very same street where Prince Martin had been gunned down on August 7, 2021. The fears of impending violence the following day turned out to be justified. On the night of August 8th, yet another innocent life would be lost as part of a particularly bloody month in Minneapolis, which included shootings, car crashes, stabbings, betrayal, prison sentences against young men, and finally, a call for peace from Prince Martin's mother, who spoke out in public just 4 days after losing her son, urging those behind the violence to, quote, put the guns down. It was an act of bravery, for as we'll see through this story, mothers are often the overlooked victims of gang violence, and they often suffer the most. But the violence is just the tip of the iceberg. In today's episode, we'll explore not just the rivalry behind these tragic incidents, but also the gang takeover of the Minneapolis fentanyl trade, the nationwide drug ring that helped supply it, and all of the deaths and prosecutions that have since followed. Minneapolis is a city of 400,000 people spread across 59 square miles. But for our story today, so many significant, life-changing events happened right here, at the intersection of West Broadway Avenue and Lyndale Avenue North. The West Broadway corridor, as it's known, represents a territorial divide. Every day, on this 3-block radius, thousands of dollars in drug money exchanges hands. Some folks have even lost their lives right here, where others have stood hours later, plotting retaliation. The Highs and Lows rivalry dates back 15 years or so. Many theories have been floated to explain how it all started, including the 2009 killing of a Taliban member named Kyle K-Top Parker. But there were a few significant homicides that helped cement the conflict in place and ensure that peace would be hard to ever come by. The Highs stay in an area north of West Broadway Avenue, while the Lows occupy the southerly regions, as highlighted by a Highs rapper known as Gregory Brown, aka Knowledge. Having such an easy-to-map territorial marker has made it easy for both gang members to find rivals, but also for them to mistake civilians for rival gang members based on their activity in a particular neighborhood. The Highs are comprised of the aforementioned Young and Thuggin gang, also known as the Taliban, as well as the Free Shots, the Black Mob, the Irv Boys, the Trey Trey Crips, and K-Block, just to name a few. The Lows are made up of the 19-block Dipset, the Stick Up Boys, Scarface, and also the Skit Squad, a gang that formed in September 2011 after a Scarface member named Jawan Skits Osborne was shot and killed on DuPont Avenue North, just 6 weeks after he allegedly shot and wounded a YNT member named Josiah Taylor, aka Joker, which coincidentally occurred 10 years to the day before Prince Martin was killed. The formation of the Skit Squad marked a particularly violent period in Minneapolis history. After Joker survived the shooting, and a Highs member presumably killed Osborne in retaliation, the Skit Squad responded with a series of shootings that led to months of retaliatory violence between them and YNT. It all culminated in an incident on the morning of June 26, 2012, when a pair of alleged Skit Squad associates fired into a home on Bryan Avenue North, where YNT members were known to reside, but instead ended up hitting Nizel George, a 5-year-old boy who was sleeping on a couch in his home when he was killed. When police made arrests, the suspects turned out to be juveniles themselves, who ultimately pled to decades in prison. As for Joker Taylor, not only did his gang membership persist, the following year he was accused of shooting a witness against his brother, Samuel Josephat Taylor, in a case involving the killing of a Minneapolis cab driver. Another significant spree of shootings came in May of 2016, when a man named Roy Dolo Davis was gunned down during a gathering of low-end members in a shooting that left 7 others wounded. Weeks later, a high-end member named Derek Little D. Rogers was chased down the Olson Highway and fatally shot, allegedly by Lowe's members seeking revenge for Dolo. At the scene of Rogers' death, a Highs member known as Tez Blood stood above his close friend's body when another member who was incarcerated happened to call him. Quote, "Somebody gonna go to sleep tonight, bro," Tez allegedly told his friend. "Somebody gonna feel how I feel." What followed was a string of violence, including the killing of a 2-year-old, Levante King Jones, during a drive-by shooting, and the fatal shooting of 36-year-old Crystal Collins, who was allegedly used as a human shield by the gang member who the attacker had been aiming at. During police investigations, Tez Blood's name came up as being somehow involved, but the connection was so tenuous that prosecutors never charged him. These murders, and others, were almost surely on the minds of police investigators after the evening of August 7, 2021, when Prince Martin was shot and killed while standing outside Winners Gas at the corner of West Broadway and Lyndale Avenue North. It was a location well known to gang members and police as the, quote, murder stop. And as the name implies, there had been shootings there before, like when the Highs Black Mob member William Ravon Johnson, aka Lil Will, survived being shot there a year earlier. But if you're wondering about what would cause gang members engulfed in a bitter rivalry to hang out in the same places outside where they could be easily spotted by rivals or police, the answer is actually quite simple. As the famous saying goes,
"There's a lot of money in that white powder."
In recent years, we've seen prescription painkillers and anti-anxiety medication that have fully taken over as the drugs of choice across America, from codeine cough syrup to opiate pills to Xanax. But the most infamous among them is the synthetic drug fentanyl, which is responsible for countless overdoses among not just those who intentionally use it, but also others who believed they were ingesting something else. Counterfeit oxycodone and Xanax are more common in some drug circles than the real thing, and the results speak for themselves. In major metropolitan areas, coast to coast, it is common for the fatal overdose rate to not just exceed, but completely dwarf the rate of homicides. Minnesota has been no exception. The state saw a whopping 1,356 fatal drug overdoses in 2021, most of which occurred in the Minneapolis area. For context, the homicide rate in Minnesota was 182 in 2022, though once again, a majority of these deaths occurred in the city that was once known as Murderapolis. It should come as no surprise, then, to learn that gangs have adapted to meet the demand of this fentanyl phenomenon. A review of arrest reports from along the West Broadway corridor show that the drug dealers typically only carried 2 things during the relevant time period in our story: fentanyl, and ironically, cannabis, which is on the complete opposite end of the spectrum in terms of danger. While marijuana flowers literally grow on trees and are easy to produce, the Highs had to tap into a national drug ring to keep the fentanyl coming in. Unaware that drug agents were monitoring them, several Highs members were making regular round trips from Minnesota to Phoenix, Arizona. to meet with a supplier, who would in turn mail packages of counterfeit blue M30 pills containing fentanyl to a business in Minneapolis where a Highs member could access them. Typically, these packages weighed more than 3 kilos and would get divided up among members who hung out at places like Winner's Gas, Merwin Liquors, and several other businesses along a 3-block stretch of West Broadway Avenue. For example, a Highs member named Marin Bailey, aka Booney, was arrested with 257 pills and $3,600 in cash after he and 2 other gang members ran through a Boost Mobile at 523 West Broadway, locked the door behind them, and ran out of the back in a failed attempt to escape police capture. In another incident, Damone Rhodes of the Highs was arrested with $21,000 in cash and 1,000 fentanyl pills. The open nature of this fentanyl market was so severe that in 2022, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison publicly announced that he would investigate whether Merwin Liquors and Winter Gas were, quote, maintaining or permitting an unlawful public nuisance on their properties. All of this contributed to what occurred on August 8, 2021. On that evening, a group of mourners gathered outside Winter's gas station to pay tribute to Prince Martin's memory. Throughout the evening, a few members in the crowd would break away, go commit a shooting, then return and join the gathering as if nothing had happened. Finally, at around 7:30 p.m., 2 different cars of Highs members headed out. 33-year-old Lil Will Johnson, the man who'd been shot at the same location a year earlier, as well as 27-year-old Gregory Lil Lord Hamilton, and 30-year-old Dontrell Trellmo Johnson, allegedly loaded into a Dodge Charger and ended up at a store called the Skyline Market, where they clearly expected to bump into a Lowe's member. Instead, they spotted Darrell Ramon Wells Jr., a 25-year-old man who found himself at the shop for no other reason than he simply had a hankering for soda that night. He was not a gang member, but the group apparently thought he was. Lil Lord and Trellmo opened fire at Darrell, who was struck by gunfire, yet somehow found the ability to frantically sprint down the street towards an alleyway, where he collapsed. It was at this precise moment that Highs member Keon Ken Pruitt pulled up in a stolen Porsche, allegedly with Christopher Johnson, and Edward Lil Dre Washington, who got out of the vehicle and opened fire at Darrell, just to make sure he was dead. Years later, in a court of law, Darrell's mother, Christe Wells, would have this to say: DJ was killed for absolutely no reason. My child was taken away for nothing. He was everything to me and his dad. He was my pride and joy. After the shooting, the 2 cars made their way back down to Winter's Gas to continue the impromptu funeral of their friend. But their surveillance cameras at the store would prove to be their undoing. Police compared mourners' clothing to those who'd been present for the murder, starting with the identification of Christopher Johnson, who promptly confessed, but also named Ken and Lil Dre as his accomplices. Johnson ultimately signed a cooperation agreement to testify against the remaining suspects, who were all brought up on murder charges. The result was a series of indictments aimed not just at the Highs, but 3 main gangs thought to be responsible for a bulk of the gun violence in Minneapolis. The U.S. Attorney's Office filed 1 case against a subset of the Bloods, another that charged Lowe's members with possessing guns, and a huge indictment that targeted Highs members for multiple murders, extended periods of fentanyl sales, and general involvement in criminal activity under the RICO statute. The indictments were bad news for some and worse news for others. And to the public, they contained a trove of information that hadn't before been made public. For instance, police revealed that 1 week before Prince Martin's death, they had broken up a memorial for a murdered Lowe's member and arrested alleged gang members there on suspicion of possessing guns. The Highs indictment also revealed the name of Tez Blood, the mysterious gangster that local newspapers had opted to keep anonymous years earlier. Gregory Brown, the Highs rapper known as Lil G and Knowledge, was in the indictment too, though his charges were limited to alleged fentanyl sales. Others weren't so lucky. Highs member Christopher Finch, aka Twin, was charged with a June 7, 2021 robbery attempt where an accomplice named Samantha Javay Taylor was shot and killed by the robbery victim. Javon Jojo Knight was charged with attempting to rob a group of teens on April 12, 2021, resulting in a 15-year-old accomplice named Jaden Mitchell Blackman being fatally shot, and 35-year-old Ahmed Mohammed Badal being killed by Highs member Jalen Salter after they crashed their car into Badal's car during the getaway. 5 months later, on September 9, 2021, Jalen Salter was shot and killed at a local barbershop. That same day, the indictment alleges that Highs member Tyrese Giles posted a memorial tribute to Salter on Facebook, then traveled to Penwood Market in Minneapolis and killed a Lowe's member, identified as Darian Berry. 5 days after that, Joker Knight, who'd proved his loyalty to the gang by shooting an eyewitness at just 17 years old, allegedly shot and killed a Lowe's member. Finally, on January 7, 2022, a group of Highs members committed the ultimate act of disrespect when they allegedly destroyed a memorial to Lowe's member Emmanuel Jones, then shot at a vehicle of passing Lowe's members. Darrell Wells Jr.'s alleged killers were included in the indictment as well, even though they were already charged with the murder in state court. But most of Darrell Wells' killers have already taken plea deals in state court, like Ken Pruitt did on February 16, 2023. On that day, he walked into the Hennepin County Courthouse with his family and Darrell's family watching from the audience, admitted to driving the stolen Porsche up to give his two accomplices a clear shot at Darrell, then heard heartbreaking statements from Darrell's family. Finally, Ken rose to make his own statement, publicly speaking about the case for the first time. First, he apologized. Then he had this to say. "I don't mean to cry like throwing a pity party or something. That's just my mom because she's been trying to help me be a better person, and that's just my actions that got me into this. My mom always tried to keep me in the regular, and that's just me not listening. I never listened to her.